Welcome to Know Your Ancestors. I am Megan Hillier and I am the host, and I am excited that you're here today. Now, today I wanted to talk to you about culture and uncovering our culture. Now, as a white person myself, growing up, my culture felt like big family get togethers, eating a lot of food, and celebrating together, family. There's not really a lot of traditions or things that have been passed down from my ancestors. So when I see now, I see a lot of other cultures that have a rich, vibrant story and rituals and traditions that have been passed down. It can feel kind of like, well, where is that for me? I think there is a lot of cases of cultural appropriation where maybe us white people are taking some of those traditions and beautiful ceremony and things that we see in all other cultures and adopting that for ourselves. Now, I do not have a ton of history or knowledge or understanding of all of that. So I'm not going to really dive into the ethics of that or what we should or shouldn't do. I'm just saying what I see, right? I think there is a longing for that culture, for that rootedness, and for that understanding of our heritage. And if you are also white like me, maybe you feel that too. If you're not, if you do have a rich cultural heritage, and maybe you do feel disconnected from that, I feel like you can also explore that journey to feel more connected and have more of an understanding of your roots so that you can celebrate that too. So if you are feeling a bit disconnected from your roots, if you are curious about where your people even come from, there's a few ways that we can do that, where we can discover that. I'm going to talk about that today. Even if you already have a family tree, I think we can still feel disconnected from those places. Now, my friend Melanie Marisol, I don't even know if I'm saying your last name right, Melanie, but she was on the podcast a few months ago. She is an ancestral astrologist, and she has a free email sequence that she helps you kind of dive into a little bit of this. On the podcast, she talked a lot about how we can uncover some of our heritage by reading children's books that talk about that culture, because they have a lot of simple stories and things that you can read and discover that help you learn more about your own heritage. So I'll put the link to her free little email sequence if you want to explore that. But she actually reached out to me and she's like, "Hey, Megan, I think you should talk about like surname origins and how that can give us some context and clues into where our people come from." So I've been kind of thinking about that and then thinking about, culture and understanding our culture and finding our culture. So I'm going to talk about kind of all of that together. Okay, so I'm catering this towards people of European descent like me that are white that feel a disconnect from their culture. Maybe they feel like white doesn't have a culture or whatever. I want to tell you that's not true. You just have to maybe dig a little deeper and know more about your roots so that you know where they come from. So I feel like there's been a lot of kind of a replacement of, I'll just say my culture, which has been replaced by maybe work, productivity, entertainment, kind of surface level traditions like Christmas with Santa Claus and Easter bunnies, and even national holidays. Like I'm in Canada, we celebrate Canada Day a lot. Like there's kind of all these present day culture that I feel like has replaced some of our rooted ancestral culture. We gather, we eat lots of food, we laugh, we spend time with family, but it's not really rooted in like an ancestral, historical ritual or whatever. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think there's been some maybe with religion coming in and with some misunderstandings of what that people were like and paganism and all of that. Like, I think there's some fear of going back to the land, understanding of our deep ancestors, but I think there's a place for it. I feel like there is a place for it and that it can help us to feel connected and to feel support and strength from our ancestors that we might not ever even know their names, but we know where they lived. We know the land and we can look at historical information for that location and understand more of what their life, their celebrations, their culture was like. Our ancestors had connection to land. They had shared traditions. They had community identity, and they had rituals tied to their real life. And we might feel the absence of that because we don't see it really. So it's not that we don't have culture, it's just that we've been disconnected from it. So maybe our culture was lost through migration or assimilation when they arrived in North America. I know I've talked about my grandma before. She's from Wales and she had a Welsh accent when she came and went to school, and kids made fun of her, so she never spoke Welsh again. And I think we have a lot of ancestors like that. It didn't feel safe to celebrate their culture and to be obvious about it, right? So a lot of that disappeared. A lot of that was assimilated. A lot of that was for their survival too, that it was safer to become white. And I talked a bit about this with Hillary Giovanni. She was on the podcast a bit ago too. So go listen to that podcast too, because she's much more smart about all of this stuff than I am. So I wanted to talk about 3 ways that we can even just discover what our culture is based on if we just don't even know where our people come from. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that today. I feel like there's a whole other part of this that I don't necessarily feel qualified to talk about, but I can talk about this. How can you discover your own culture instead of attaching yourself to others that, obvious or more appealing or more out there? Okay, so number 1 is to take a DNA test. Ancestry DNA, they have ethnicity results on there, and it can tell you where genetically you come from. Now, this isn't an exact science. A lot of it is, it's all probabilities, and some locations will be more accurate than others. Obviously, if you have more percentage, it's more likely that that one's accurate. So it's not like cut and dry. This is your ancestry profile and that's what you are. There's going to be some nuance and some things that aren't exactly right. And they're constantly updating it. But I can give you some insight and some ideas of where your people come from. Okay. Especially if you don't even have a family tree yet, that's a great place to start, just to get some feel for where you might come from. The second way is to learn the origins of your surname or your family surnames. Now, this is what Melanie was saying I should do a whole podcast about, which I haven't dove into it a ton, but from my understanding as a genealogist, I can give some insight into that. Jen Schaefer from the Formidable Genealogist a while ago or a few days ago, she posted a video and said that one way is to look at passenger lists. And I had never thought about doing that. So when you can find a database for passenger lists for people coming to the country that you live in, and it can list where they're coming from. So you put in your ancestral name that you want to look at. Maybe that's Freeze. That's my maiden name. So you can put that in, see where those people came from. That can give you some ideas. There's also some like surname maps that you can Google online for different countries. So then you can maybe know your ancestor came from somewhere in Germany, and you can find a surname map that will tell you where there's more of that surname. You can also just use Google. So in preparation for this, I just Googled my own surname, which is Freeze, which is very much not a common name. We know that names come from a lot of different methods. There's patronymics, which those are like Anderson, Larson, even from Wales, Perry, that was like Ap Harry. So it was the son of Harry, became kind of combined to Perry, surname of my grandma. So that's where some names came from. So then there's some names like Smith or Baker or Taylor that come from this person's occupation. So at some point, people decided to expand their name to include a descriptor that was like a surname. Sometimes it came from the land that they lived in, like a descriptor of their farm or their land. And again, sometimes it was patronymics, which is a lot of surnames. Jones, as Welsh also, that comes from, son of John. And like I said, Anderson, Larson, all of those types of names. Okay, so we know like a general idea of some. But what about those names that are maybe a little different? So my last name is Freeze. Melanie, when she was talking to me about this, she said someone asked her and her surname was Power. So like, how do we find out where that actually comes from? And Google can be helpful, but there is a lot of misinformation out there. So that's why you kind of want to do that to get some sense, and then maybe start looking at your actual genealogy research that's been done to find out that information. So for me, when I went on Google, it said that my surname Fries, it can come from multiple ideas of where that surname comes from. So it could come from a region of Friesland or Frisia, which is Germanic or Dutch. Okay, so that could be where it comes from, or English or Germanic nickname. It can originate from the Old English word Friesen or Vriesen, which is to freeze. So it could be a nickname for a person with a cold demeanor or someone who lived in a very cold area. Or it can be occupational, which is a variant of Fries, which is a metonymic name for a weaver or seller of Fries. So I know that my farthest back we can go in our Fries line, they come from England. So maybe that was the occupation that says that can come from England, which is like name for a weaver or seller. Maybe that's where it came from. I don't know. We don't really know for sure, right? Because we don't have the records from when that first originated. So those are two ways to kind of get ideas. You're not going to get exact, right? The only way you're going to find exactly where your ancestors come from is by doing genealogy research. You want to get your ancestors across the pond. So if you have if you're from North America, you live here where I live, you'll just keep going back in your family tree until you find that ancestor that was born in another country. There's a whole other bit about like how can you actually find them across the pond? How do you know if you have your right John Smith from England and not some other John Smith? You always have to go from what you know. So you're going to want to find as much records as you can here in United States or Canada where they immigrated to. A lot of times obituaries I have found that it will say where your ancestor was born. But if your ancestor came like 1700s, it's going to be difficult. There's not passenger lists. Okay, so a lot of it will have to come from historical context, understanding who was immigrating to the United States or Canada at that time. A lot of it was people from England, from Britain. So that's most likely where your ancestors would have come from if they came then. I guess there was a lot of ancestors that came from Germany around that time as well, but maybe a little bit later. So if you are just getting started with this, you're just curious about your ancestry, these are three ways. I mean, the first two are kind of quick ways to get some idea about where your people come from. The third way, obviously doing research is going to take more time, but I feel like it's the most accurate and very fulfilling process. So if you want help with that, if you are curious about your family tree, where you come from, please sign up for an origin initiation. This is where we meet together. I get information from you about your family, whether you don't have really any information besides the names of your grandparents and where they lived, or maybe you have an entire family tree, but you're feeling kind of overwhelmed with all the information. In an origin initiation, we sit down, I find out what your goals are, what you're curious about, what do you want to learn more about. I do a little bit of analysis of your family tree to see what branches would be the most fruitful, which ones, if you're interested in, like which branches we can start diving into, and then we can move forward in a way that is helpful for you. After we do the origin initiation, we can move on to more research, or maybe you just want to have a clear path for yourself of where you should start your own research. So if you'd like to book an origin initiation, just go to knowyourancestors.co/origin and we can get started. All right, so thank you so much for listening today. I hope that this podcast was helpful for you as you are just starting your journey to understand your own culture, your own heritage, understanding where your people come from, and how that can help you have a much better understanding of your ancestral roots, can help you feel part of something bigger, and can help you have more fun just to explore some of that early history of different locations where your ancestors lived. There's a lot of information out there on the internet, and you can find out about the people that lived where your ancestors lived. Find out what their life might have been like. Find out what beliefs were going on at that time. Find out about what conquests or wars or hardships were happening at the time, or what the land was like, what the climate was like, what the people were like. I hope that gives you some ideas of how you can explore that. And again, reach out, go to knowyourancestors.co/origin if you'd like to sit down with me and really get started digging into your lineage. Thanks so much for being here today, and we will see you next week.